Have you got links?
Stuff.
Muted.
We are. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm Anne Chapman, the acting chairman of Ealing Civic Society. Welcome to our 2020 awards scheme. This year is, of course, somewhat different to usual, as we're having to do this virtually. At this point, can I ask everyone observing to ensure that they remain muted, and if you wish, switch off your video as well. To start talking about the awards scheme. The scheme has been running each year since 1989. It's intended to encourage and to celebrate good design, and also the wide variety of building and related activity going on in the borough. Many schemes of different sorts have received awards over the years. This year, I'm very pleased that we'll be joined by James Murray, the MP for Ealing North, who will be presenting our virtual awards. Before we move to the actual ceremony, I would like to say a few words about the work of the Civic Society. Some of you may be joining us for the first time, some may not be members. The Society was formed now 53 years ago, and it came into its own shortly afterwards when the threat of inappropriate and unwelcome town centre redevelopment was hanging over us. The Society challenged this and worked to change a lot of what was happening, with some success. The strapline of the Society is working to preserve and to improve our borough. As such, it covers many areas, encompassing design, heritage, conservation, regeneration, planning, streetscape, and our green spaces. Over the years, we've embraced the conservation agenda and were instrumental in the designation of several conservation areas and locally listed buildings. We've developed into a positive force for conservation coupled with sensitive development. What is very evident, though, is that we continue to face the same or possibly even greater challenges now as over 50 years ago. Major housing-led so-called regeneration schemes continue to be proposed, with, it seems, tower blocks of minimal flats seen as the only game in town. These schemes generally show little or no sensitivity to the heritage of our local architecture, so our fight must continue. Our awards scheme, encouraging and celebrating good architecture, is at the core of what we're here to do. So, for the running order for tonight, we first have a presentation which was drawn up by the award judges and introduces each of the submitted schemes. After the presentation, when there will be an opportunity for some questions, I will then ask James Murray to join me to present the virtual awards to our winners. After that, he has agreed to give us a short talk of his own about his experiences as an MP. Before we go into the presentation, I'd like to thank all our judges, Harbinder Birdie, Anya Lill and Anthony Ferguson, who took the time and look at all the entries, albeit virtually, earlier this month. I'm now going to pass over to Maggie Gold, who will talk about the schemes. Thank you, Maggie. Now to your presentation.
Thank you, Anne. Well, as Anne said, our award's been running for a while now. We cover new buildings, major refurbishments, restorations or extensions to new buildings, and landscaping projects. There's no restriction as to the size or cost of the projects that can be nominated, but they do need to meet certain criteria. And these include that the project has to be located within the London Borough of Ealing. And although that sounds pretty basic, you'd be surprised how many occasions we have our eye on a project which turns out to be just the wrong side of the road or just outside the borough. The work must be have been completed in the last 2 years preceding the year of the award, and it must have been in use for its intended purpose for at least 6 months before the closing date for entries. The normal procedure is for nominations to be received in September and a short list to be drawn up by the Communications Committee of projects for the judges to visit in early October. We have 3 or 4 judges, depending on the nature of the entries, and they spend a day visiting the projects with 1 or 2 members of our society. At the end of all this, the judges confer and decide on the nature of the award to be made. We ask the judges to look at 4 things: the design of the entries, the contribution to landscape, sustainability issues surrounding questions of energy efficiency, anti-pollution measures, reuse of materials, and of course fitness for purpose. Now for 2020, COVID rather impacted on our usual practice. It became clear that having a group of 5 or 6 people visiting 8 or so projects was not in keeping with the way COVID was trending locally, so we switched to a paper exercise. The nomination documents were passed to the judges for them to examine, and they met virtually on the judging day to discuss and decide on any awards. Anne's already thanked the judges, but I'd like to reinforce that because without them, we couldn't have managed this at all. But I'd also like to thank Harbinder and his colleague Hardik Patel, who put this presentation together. Harbinder has not been able to join us this evening, so I'm running through his presentation and comments in his place. But I must say there's no hidden message in the order in which these projects are discussed in the presentation. We ended up with 6 entries for the award this year. And this is where I'm hoping my slide will change, and it's not. So Patrick, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
yes, I can, Maggie.
for some reason, my page up and down is not.
Has stopped working.
Yeah, it's not.
Try down arrow.
That's not either. Ah, that is.
That's it. I think.
Right.
There we go.
Sorry for that blip. You practice these things beforehand, and then
It worked well.
on the nights, something always, a spanner in the works always upsets you. Anyway, this is Mortimer Road. It's a 1930s house that had a rear conservatory extension, and the brief was to remove and replace this extension and reconfigure the adjoining interior spaces to create a modern kitchen and entertaining space that you can see here. The brief also called for a new rear garden hardscape and direct access and views from the house. This shows the building as it was with the old rear extension here at the top right. And the fact that this was north facing meant that the challenge of the brief was to introduce a sense of light and airiness to the design and to bring the garden into the house and the house into the garden and to make that work throughout the year. The plan for the new extension shows the kitchen and dining area here at the top and extending into the garden, and you can see the way in which the paving has been used and the within the house and outside to sort of unite the inside with the surrounding garden area. Here we have a section through the new kitchen. It shows the sliding doors, letting people out, and the light in. And in this aerial view of the garden and the extension, you can see how the petrology porcelain stone flooring in the kitchen comes through into the garden. And on the lower image there, you can see the skylight letting additional natural light into the kitchen space below. And you can see the garden design there as well. In these images show the start of the project, the demolition of the old extension and the start of rebuilding and the reconfiguration of the interior spaces. Here you see the interior detailing. So there's use of brass in the island unit there in the kitchen, and brass is used in the ring lights above. And if you look out through the windows there, you can see Barbican style ribbing round the pond walls, which strikes a note to lovers of modernism, I guess. And also there was a connection made between the circular ponds and the circular ring lights as well, to kind of add an extra connection between the two spaces. Finally, this image shows the Nordic blue copper cladding that was used on the extension. And this was inspired by the copper finials. And if you look on this image here, you can see the copper finials on the roof of the main house. And this was used to inspire the use of copper on the extension below, which you can see in these images. The judges liked the way the project responded to the client's lifestyle, allowing family and guests to spill out of the garden, spill out of the kitchen into the garden area. Next, we have Acton Town Hall. This is a building which Ealing residents will know well, and I was just thinking myself of the concerts I've been to in Acton Town Hall, and I've even invigilated examinations in there. But this project encompassed the conversion of the old Town Hall building, which is a grade 2 listed building, into 58 housing units. And then there's a further 13 units in a new extension, which you can see there on the left of this image. A plan of the site shows the old and new buildings. So on the left, block A here in this plan is the old Town Hall building being converted into apartments. And then down here, block B is the new build part of the scheme. So there's 71 units in all in the scheme. The plans here show from left to right the layout of 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, and 3-bedroom flats. The 3-bedroom flats on the right there are designed over 2 floors. Altogether, the project provides 3 studio flats, 27 1-bedroom units, and 39 2-bedroom units, as well as the 2 3-bedroom flats I mentioned earlier. And 20% of the 71 units provided in the project are affordable. These photographs show the interior of one of the flats. You can see there a bedroom space, kitchen diner, and steps down into one of the kitchen areas. Given its listed status, in designing these spaces, the existing walls, windows, and doors were retained, with the apartments fitted around these elements. In some cases, this meant quite large loft-style spaces or open-plan arrangements because of the position of the existing openings and walls. These images show the splendid communal spaces of the old town hall that have been retained and restored. Particularly there on the left, the grand staircase that formerly led to the theatre, council chamber, interview rooms, and committee room. And here are more examples of spaces within some of the units with the period detailing retained. The judges observed the scheme brought new life into the old town hall, including renovations of the existing civic centre's finishes. The adjacent new build apartments allowed multiple dwelling sizes to be created, and it fitted with the neighbouring civic building's external aesthetic, matching the existing brickwork finishes. Our third project here is Ascot Avenue, and this comprises two newly built, identical, detached Edwardian style houses. There are small front gardens shown here, but much larger gardens at the rear. The floor plans show the range of spaces provided. The two plans on the left of the top two floors contain 5 bedrooms between them. The ground floor has a front reception room and a kitchen dining room looking onto the back garden at the rear. And then there's a basement containing family room, games room, utility room, and a shower room. And that has a connection up to the garden at the back. Here we have the front ground floor reception room, which is designed as a more traditional formal space. While many of the other spaces have been designed to provide spacious or open plan layouts, and the designers felt that they could do spaces like this more easily than would be possible by renovating a century-old Edwardian property. This is the family room in the rear of the basement area, and if you look through the windows there, you can see the staircase going up to the garden from the courtyard area, which is just outside the windows. And that courtyard is just large enough for a table and chairs, sort of to the right of the window there. Here we've got the ground floor reception room. Here we've got the kitchen and dining room, showing how natural light has been used from skylights and the enormous glazed doors leading onto the substantial rear garden there with trees and lawns. This is an example of one of the smaller bedrooms, but it shows the approach of the interiors, which has been to create very clean lines rather than go for the Edwardian ornamentation that you get in a period property. Finally, here's the view of the rear of the house. You can see the steps down to the basement level on the right there, and on the left, you can see here is a glazed bridge or walkway over the courtyard below that connects the kitchen dining area with the garden. The judges liked the elegant and interesting spaces that have been created within these properties and were impressed with the internal finishes and scales that have been achieved with the interiors. Next, we have the University of West London's new sports centre. Now, the University of West London Sports Centre is the latest phase in the university's St Mary's Road Future Campus project, which has already seen major enhancement of the facilities for students and staff. This particular project was designed to remedy the deficiencies of the existing gym, which was too small and oversubscribed. So the aim of this project was to expand provision and create a modern, contemporary and versatile youth or community fitness and exercise centre for use by students, staff and the wider community. And the spaces can also be used as activity hubs and venues for the university societies and clubs. The project has been accommodated on the St Mary's site and occupies the yellow area there on the plan. The original proposal was for a much more substantial building able to accommodate team sports, but was reconfigured in the light of local opposition to the scale of the project. So the building here minimises its impact on the surrounding residential properties. But in scaling down, the facility now focuses on personal fitness facilities, and the team sports capacity is being accommodated elsewhere off campus. The plans here show the 2 floors of the building. So on the left, you have the ground floor plan, which shows the reception, arrival space, gym, access to studios and fitness spaces. And then on the first floor, you've got changing facilities for males, females, and disabled use. This cross section here shows how the new Kerrison building, which is shown in pink here, and which had already been constructed, has been reconfigured to provide sports facilities. And then the new build extension to the left has, as it were, extended into the car park area. These images show the studios, a very impressive array here of exercise machines, and below that, the open exercise area. This image shows the site as it was before construction, and the original plan for this project would have covered much of the parking area you see in the foreground of this image. The revised scheme fits very neatly around the existing building, kind of extending to the left of the photograph, and as you see here with the entrance and the retention of the existing buildings in their original form. The judges liked the way the two-storey extension mimicked the external aesthetic of the existing university building, and kind of reads as part of the original. There's also the direct entrance to the sports centre from the car park, which allows views of the fitness studios as you enter. Our fifth entry is the Origami House. The brief here was for a project to reimagine and repurpose an existing garden home office outbuilding into a flexible single-storey family annex. This was intended as a starter home for a family member, but became an invaluable home office during the coronavirus lockdown. These plans show the corner site and the interesting geometric possibilities it provided, which inspired the dynamic roof design and the interesting shapes of the interior spaces. The bottom right-hand corner there, you can see, for example, the triangular bathroom. The yellow area is the bedroom, and then lapping around these, you have the seating area, dining and kitchen areas. This is the original flat-roofed structure that was demolished, but it had this unusual polygon-shaped footprint necessitated by the geometry of the corner garden plot it occupied. And so the new build used the existing piled foundations and capitalized on that unusual layout, which ultimately led to the name for the project. This shows the construction phase. Cross-laminated timber panels were used for the roof and walls, and this created maximum height, volume, and relatively large spans, so no interior beams were required. And here you see the CLT panels being maneuvered into place, a process which took a mere 5 days to bring in, assemble, and secure the structure. This is a view out of the ground floor into the garden, and it shows the prefabricated aluminium doors, windows, and roof lights that were fitted immediately the wooden structure was completed, so that a weathertight structure was achieved within a week from the panels being delivered to the site. They also bring in natural light into the internal spaces, and of course, you get this incredible view, in the words of the judges, across the garden. The kitchen and living room here show how well space has been utilised for storage. Here you've got the bathroom on the left, living room on the right, and you can see that minimum internal finishes were required in the project given the beauty of the CLT structural timber, which has simply been left without adornment. A major element of this project was the sustainability standards, including triple glazing and external insulation that made this an energy efficient structure as close to passive house standards as possible. And here is a final view of the finished project showing this link between the structure and the garden. The judges liked the use of timber and the unique and impressive dynamic roof design. They remarked on the use of natural light and the way in which every corner of the building had been utilised to accommodate utility spaces and storage. Our final project is St Albans Avenue. This is an extension to a Victorian corner terrace house, and the extension is on the left, but visually it fits seamlessly with the original building, and the brickwork windows match the rest of the house exactly. The brief here was to provide a wheelchair accessible extension, including a lift. This plan shows the almost wedge-shaped plot with the footprint of the original house here, and the garden, as it were, lapping around three sides of the plot. And you can see down here the way in which the extension fits at the side of the house. In this diagram, you can see the use of the internal arrangement of space and how the extension connects with the original house. The floor levels of the original house have been adjusted to create a barrier-free access, and the new space flows naturally into the existing spaces. And here in the centre you have the lift. And that gives access to the first floor area, which again gives full accessibility to the whole of the first floor. This is a plan of the roof area showing the photovoltaic cells up here for generating electricity. A nice touch here are the three circular blind, the three circular blind window access recesses on the side of the house, which are here and are inspired by William Morris's Red House. I think that's a building that probably resonates with a number of our members. And funnily enough, I was only talking about this building with my students yesterday morning. So yeah, an interesting sort of connection there. This photograph shows the quality of the finishes and the use of wood on the left, and on the right you can see the lift shaft. The project included the landscape of the garden, and you can see here how it's fully accessible through the sliding doors at the rear of the house. Overall, the judges noted that this complete redesign of the dwelling has allowed a comfortable quality of life for the client. So next year, we hope that the award will be back to its traditional procedures and the judges will be able to see for themselves the buildings that are submitted. But for now, it's back to you, Anne.
Right, thank you very much, Maggie. That has given us, I hope everybody will agree, a very comprehensive, if relatively quick, introduction to the 6 schemes which have been submitted this year, all of which are, I think, of very high quality in all their different ways, and quite a wide selection. No landscape projects this year, sadly, partly I think as a result of the pandemic, in that pure landscape projects such as the ones that the council might have been undertaking have really not gone ahead this year. So now on to the actual presentation of the awards. I'm pleased to see that James Murray has joined us. James Murray was elected as the MP for Ealing North just in December 2019. He previously worked as Deputy Mayor for Housing for the Mayor of London, where he oversaw the Mayor's Affordable Homes programme. And prior to his time at City Hall, he was for many years a councillor in Islington. So his public sector, public service experience now spans a number of years. But his year, obviously, or his time, I should say, as an MP has been atypical, and I think we will later hear a little bit about that. So moving to the focus of the evening, the actual awards for this year. This year, the judges have decided to award 2 projects with awards. 2 of the entries will receive commendations. If, Patrick, we could see the first certificate, please. So the first certificate, the first commendation is to the Origami House. The Origami House was designed by KSK Architects for private clients. Just to remind you, this was the reimagination and repurposing of an existing Home Office garden outbuilding into a single-storey, flexible family annex. What I'd now like to do is to ask James to present the certificate to Matt Keeler, KSKA's founding architect. And Matt will then perhaps say a few words about the project. So could I ask both James and Matt to make sure you're on video and unmuted, please. And then first, James, if you could virtually present the certificate.
Well, I've done a lot of things virtually, but I think virtually presenting a certificate presents its own challenges. Exactly how I can manage that. I should have printed out something here and then handed it through the screen or something. But where is Matt? Is Matt down there? There's Matt. Hi, Matt. So for me, you're just down there. So if I can imagine I've got the certificate here and congratulate you very much, and then pass it over through my screen down to you. There we go. That looked great. Congratulations, Matt, and well done.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very honoured. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, everybody's frozen. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. We're very honoured. Our connection is slightly.
Matt,
We've lost you.
yeah, it looks like Matt's connection has failed us there. Do you wish to move on, Anne?
Yep. What I will say, for those of you who can see the picture, Matt, I'm sure we can come back to you. Those of you who can see in the picture, this is not the first certificate that KSK Architects have received from the Civic Society. There was another one from a previous year in the background there. So say, well done again, Matt. Let's move on to the second one. So Patrick, if you could put the second certificate up, please.
Yep, here we go.
The second commendation is for another residential project for private clients, 1A Mortimer Road by Lille Architects. This was a refurbishment. Part of the existing building was removed, was demolished, reconfigured and replaced with new landscaping added to the rear garden. So again, James, I would like you please to present this certificate. I think we have one of the owners, Paul Jellicoe, is with us. And if Paul, you can make sure you're unmuted, and perhaps again, Matt, you can virtually pass the certificate across.
Let me see if I can manage this again. So where's Paul?
Paul and Amanda.
Paul and
Yes,
Amanda.
we are here.
I can see the lights. I can see the ring lights.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah, that's part of it. We're in the
what Anya did for us.
Excellent. Yeah, and I thought they reminded me a bit of, do you remember in the Olympic opening ceremony, you had all the rings kind of floating
Yeah.
together?
In fact, we've got a relative who got a, what did she get? A silver or bronze? I can't remember.
Bronze.
A bronze in the Olympics, and yeah, they were very impressed.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let me get the virtual certificate here and then hand it down. For me, you're over here on the screen. I'm not quite sure where I am for you, but I will hand that certificate over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you. We're really
Congratulations.
Thank you, Anya.
Thank you. Yeah, she was. Do we have a chance to say anything about Anya?
Yeah. Please do say. Tell us what you liked about the project, how it worked.
Well,
yes.
Only very, very briefly, because I don't want to bore you or anything. I don't know if you can see us, but basically every other architect that we had to talk to us about doing our thing only spoke to Paul. None of them spoke to me. Which, you know, hey, well, I thought it was a little bit sexist, but Anya was the first person who we spoke to who actually listened to both of us. And we've got very differing views on what we like. And she was absolutely amazing because she listened to both of us and she designed something that both of us liked. And I can't praise her enough for that. And we've recommended it to loads of other people. She was recommended to us by my hairdresser. So that's, but it's fantastic. We've been really, and especially with you know, the whole lockdown thing and having to work from home and all that sort of thing, this whole space has been absolutely amazing for us. And yeah, we can't praise her higher enough, can we?
No, she's very easy to work with, which is more than we can say for us.
Yeah. She's very diplomatic.
Well, that's a fantastic tribute.
Absolutely thrilled. Absolutely thrilled with
for me,
everything.
as well as seeing how beautiful the extension looks, seeing how happy you clearly are there, kind of adds to it for me. That makes that's a real sign of a real success, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
She listened to what we said and she took it on.
Making it sound like most of the ideas were ours, but they obviously weren't.
No. She listened to what we said and then she made it something that we will both agree on, and that's fantastic.
She should go into politics, huh?
Lovely. Thank you very much, both Paul and Amanda. It's lovely to see you, and as James said, to see how delighted you are with this project. I think we're running quite well. Matt, I saw, came back in. I don't know, Matt, did you want to carry on saying anything?
I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Matt. Yes, we can.
Good.
Yes.
Sorry, we lost connection and so we switched to phones. Yes, well, I'd just like to say we were very privileged to be allowed to do this project. The brief was completely open. Oh no.
No, we can still hear you.
Right. Yeah. So we were given a completely open brief by the client. We did such a good job on their extension. They
It's not going to work, is it?
You see, I've heard of people freezing when they go up on stage, but this is a whole new meaning to that.
Don't worry. Maybe when we come, maybe we open it up to questions a bit later on, and maybe we can have a dialogue work a bit later on. Okay. So,
yeah.
on behalf of Civic, are you there again? No. Sorry, Matt, you keep freezing. It's not going to work.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry. What I'd like to say on behalf of Ealing Civic Society is our congratulations to both our winners this year. I mean, I think they really are exciting and excellent projects, which do demonstrate exactly what we want to demonstrate, is that it is possible to have good design in Ealing, and both these projects coincidentally on a, I suppose what I call it, on a a human scale. These are homes for people to live in. They, interestingly, and this is one of the sort of the issues that's come up with other developments, and particularly in the light of COVID, is they have emphasised the importance of open space, of light, and all of that, which I think is everybody is finding so important for their well-being now. And I think that is really it's really encouraging. Anyway, can we now ask James to spend just a short while just giving us a little bit of an insight into what life has been like for him in the last, well, what now, 10 months since becoming an MP.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Anne, and thank you very much for inviting me along here this evening, and for giving me such free rein to talk about anything for a few minutes. So I hope I will say something of interest, but we'll also, I think, have a little bit of time for discussion or questions afterwards, which will be really good as well. I've actually, me and my partner just moved house a couple of weeks ago, and we now live in Drayton Grove, so in the Draytons, and I'll be going to a planning committee next week to object to the tower proposal. And I'm not doing that just purely as a local resident. Been involved in the opposition to that for quite a long time as an MP, and also before that in my previous role I passed on residents' concerns about it, even in my old job that I was in. So I've been well aware of the proposals there for some time. And I think for me, seeing some of the excellent quality design, as Anne said, reminds you and really shows you how good design makes such a difference, and doing things at a human scale is so important. I don't want to make it all about the opposition to the tower at Manor Road, although that obviously looms large at the moment in my local area. But I do think it underscores the importance of quality of life, of good design, and of making sure that we're building an Ealing of the future that we can all be proud of. And one thing connected with that I've been talking quite a lot to the councillors about since becoming an MP is about putting design at the heart of their home building plans for the borough, because from my point of view, earning people's consent for what development happens in the local area is crucial to bringing people along with you if as a council you want to build in your local area. And there are various ways I think you can help to encourage support for development, more affordable housing, obviously, if you're building housing, making sure the infrastructure is in place alongside any developments. But I do think design is the third aspect of building that support, which is absolutely critical. So rather than building just very large towers, which are rather nondescript and unattractively designed, look at more creative ways of building new housing, even at relatively high densities, but using better mid-rise developments, more human scale approaches, and ones where you really spend time and money on the design aspects of the process, rather than rushing ahead with something which meets opposition. And in fact, if you engage people and you engage local experts, often in the process earlier on, you can help make sure that when the proposal gets further down the line, people feel more involved in it, and quite often are happier with the design you end up with. So I've been really encouraging the council to set up a very public standing design review panel as part of the development process in the borough. It's something which I've seen operating in other councils in my former job, and I thought it worked really well. I thought it was the idea of a design review panel really improves the planning process, because what you do via a design review panel, and there are a few different ways they can work, but typically you get experts who are either sort of London-wide or national, but with an interest in the local area, or local people who have an eye to architecture and design. And what's great about that is that if they look at and review the project early on, they can give a really meaningful and positive steer to how it could be improved. And I think it just gives us a better outcome for the borough. And I think that really emphasising that importance of design is crucial. So for me, seeing this great design here today is exactly on the agenda that's important to me, and one that I'm very keen to champion. not only from a selfish point of view of thinking about the extension that I might want to have in a few years' time to my house, taking notes of those architects' names if I can, if they've got any availability, or happy to give any tips. I'm just joking. But I think, you know, if we are going to be focusing on having more space at home, particularly people are thinking about that kind of decision at the moment as a result of spending more time at home during COVID, it is important that those developments, those extensions, are done in a well-designed way, and make places where people are happy at. You know, as I said when we were giving the awards just there, seeing the people living in the new extensions so clearly happy with the outcome is so important, alongside it being objectively good design. You know, because homes are places where you should live in and be happy. Before I became an MP, as I've referenced, you know, I worked for the deputy mayor. Sorry, I was the deputy mayor. I worked for the mayor of London in his housing brief, and that's where really design was important to me. And before that, I was a councillor, so I'm well aware of a lot of the dynamics that go on in terms of local development. I have to say that seeing that building, the old Acton Town Hall, being developed into housing, I think I might find that a bit hard, actually, living in something which looks so clearly like a town hall building. Living there, I feel like I was having flashbacks to being at work 10 years ago. So maybe I shouldn't think about living there. But I remember those buildings. I used to volunteer for a helpline, for a teenage helpline when I was a teenager. So I guess about 20 years ago it must have been. And we used to volunteer in the old town hall building. So to see it being put to a new use, it's quite interesting to see how they've incorporated those design aspects of the old town hall into housing. And that staircase looks particularly grand and impressive. Obviously, after having been a councillor and deputy mayor, I got elected to be the MP for Ealing North last December, which is a huge honour. When I was enjoying my job working for the Mayor of London, but when I saw that Steve Pound, who's been a fantastic supporter and help over the last year, when I saw that he was stepping down, I thought, this is the area where I grew up. It's somewhere where I would love to represent. I'd love the opportunity to do so. And so I put my name forward, and I was very honoured to be elected. And when I was elected, I remember someone who was an MP came up to me and gave me some advice. And MPs are not shy about giving advice. They come up to you all the time and give you lots of advice. They've all got advice about how you should do it. But this one person gave me some advice about how the first few months would be really difficult, because you want to get straight into it. It's a bit overwhelming with everyone getting in touch. You haven't got an office or your staff and so on. So she said the first few months are going to be really bad, James. It's okay. Just try and get through it. By the time it gets to May, everything will have calmed down and it'll be fine. And then obviously the world turned it on its head in March, and in April and May I think was probably amongst the most difficult months actually for the country, and to be an MP representing people who have so many questions about what on earth is going on, how are we going to respond to this enormous crisis, was difficult because I felt that I sometimes didn't have the answers people wanted, and I didn't even know where to get them. And sometimes even when you found the people who should have the answers, they didn't have answers yet, because everything was moving so quickly. So it was a difficult time for everyone in the country. And I think for me to represent people and feel I was doing a good job, it was that was quite a challenging time, I think, over the last 10 or so months. But it has been a way of getting to understand the concerns and the feelings of people in my constituency very rapidly, a very very full-on experience in a way. The number of people who've been in touch with me since I was elected, if you compare it to, I spoke to someone who works for me, used to work for Steve, and she said on average about 1,500 people got in touch every year. So far I've had over 5,000 people get in touch with me since last December, and I think part of that is because I'm a new MP, but a large part of it is because people have a lot of questions about what's going on and how we're responding to COVID. And I think even beyond just COVID itself, I think people are particularly engaged in a lot of aspects of politics at the moment, because I suppose it might be because people see the Prime Minister or the Chancellor or various different ministers of the state on TV a lot, making decisions, and people can see how those decisions are impacting on all of our lives on a daily basis. And I think that if people see that politicians' decisions have an impact, the relevance of politics seems slightly closer to home, which is possibly a reason why people feel particularly engaged in my experience at the moment. So it's been a very intense experience, I guess, over the last year being an MP, trying to represent people as best as I can. And I do feel that I've got to know a lot of people's concerns and a lot of the issues people care about very quickly. I mean, it's obviously been a very strange way of getting to know the job and to represent people as well, doing it all over a screen like this. And I'm on some medications, which mean that I have to be a bit more careful than most people my age as well. So that means I haven't yet been back into Parliament. I've still been doing it over the screen like this. And it has been possible, of course, to ask questions in Parliament and to raise issues with ministers over Zoom and other electronic methods. But you do miss out on that human interaction and the casual conversations, getting to know your colleagues and so on. And I think I don't think I'm in any way unusual, and I think we all it's really shone a light on how much we value that bit of human interaction. You know, it's great that we've been able to carry on meeting, certainly meeting here tonight through Zoom, and we've been able to keep a bit of the spirit going of many different events by doing them virtually. But it would be nice to meet people more face to face again and to have that kind of human interaction. And I think I'll just draw it to a close in a second, just by sort of giving you my main thought about what issues have come up over the last year. I won't go through all of the issues. As I said, more than 5,000 people have been in touch, so it would take a while even to give a decent summary of all of that. But I think that if I look particularly at what's come up for me in terms of domestic issues, in terms of issues affecting the country and people's jobs and livelihoods and homes and so on, COVID has shone a light on problems that existed before. So COVID has obviously been its own problem and its own awful challenge, and the biggest health problem we faced in 100 years. But it's also shone a light on other issues which were there before and exacerbated them and made addressing them even more urgent and obvious. So whether that's people who are living in overcrowded housing, overcrowded housing is always very difficult for people and impacts on particularly on children and their ability to study and so on. If you're in lockdown, overcrowding is that much worse. If you're an insecure job and you're not being paid very well, that's a horrible way to have to live under normal circumstances. But if you are facing the prospect of losing your job in the middle of an outbreak or a lockdown, that's 10 times worse. Health inequalities, income inequalities, all of the inequalities which we face in society anyway, I think have really been a very strong light has been shone on them by this crisis. And I think people feel even more strongly than before that we need to do something to make the country fairer. So that, in a way, for me, I came into politics, I came into Parliament with some key things to focus on about making housing more affordable, about the NHS and social care, about mental health for young people. All of those issues were important before, but as well as the COVID crisis being a first order health crisis and an economic crisis and so on, it's also, for me, shone a light, a very particularly strong light on some of those inequalities which exist right across society. And we need to make sure that as we build back, once we begin to get through this crisis at some point, we need to make sure that we build a better society for everyone in the country.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, James. Thank you. We've got some time now for questions.
Great.
I've had one come in so far from the audience. Can I remind anybody watching that if you have a question for James, please do submit it via the chat. I say there's one already queued up, but first I'd like to ask a question. You mentioned the Manor Road Tower at very close to where you're now living, and we know that you've objected to that, and also I believe the proposed several towers on the Gurnell pool site, which obviously is also in your constituency.
Yeah.
The Manor Road application is going to committee next week, and the planning officers are recommending it should be approved, despite over 2,500 objections, or around 2,500 objections from local residents, which is quite an unprecedented number, and a number of groups, which include the civic society. All of these have essentially just been brushed aside in the officer's report. I mean, reading the report makes, for someone who's put in an objection, makes very depressing reading. So I have a couple of related questions. Firstly, tower blocks, which have many well-known disadvantages, dating back many to the era of the 60s and 70s, others that have come more recently to do with, obviously, concerns about fire regulations, to do with overcrowding. Are they really the only solution to providing what is called affordable housing, and true affordable housing, which everybody would agree is what is desperately needed? And secondly, do you have any suggestions how residents and groups such as the Civic Society can actually ensure that their wishes about development in their community are respected and adopted by planners?
Yeah, so some good meaty questions there. So very first focus on the idea you asked around tower blocks, and are tower blocks the only way to build housing and affordable housing and so on? So my answer would be no. They're not the only way. You don't have to build high rise in order to build new homes. And I think what's really crucial about this is that you don't even have to build high rise to get high density, because some built forms which are more mid rise, so kind of 6 stories, 8 stories, you know, that kind of height, you can actually develop them in kind of mansion block typologies, and get a really high density, as in quite a high number of different homes within a perimeter of the site, in a way that's much more human in scale, not so high, and actually people almost universally prefer. You know, you give people the option of, you know, how would you prefer this density to be arranged, via this tower, this high-rise tower, or via these mansion blocks, which just feels more attractive. The vast majority of people feel that actually having you know, mansion blocks can be more attractive, that kind of mid-rise approach. I mean, one of the technical reasons why that is, and you know, there's lots of aspects to this discussion, but one of the reasons why it is because if you have a tower, you have to have quite a lot of space around it, because you need the space for light to be able to get into all the different flats and all sides of the tower. Whereas if you have blocks, if you have mansion blocks, you can do them more in a terrace style. I mean, if you think of one of the highest density boroughs in the country, you know, it's Kensington and Chelsea. And most of Kensington and Chelsea is not high rise, you know, it's dense, but it's not high rise. And that's because they typically go for those kind of 6, 8, 10 story terraced blocks in that borough. So, you know, there are some really important lessons there about design. And I think that's why, for me, design is so important. Having people who just really understand design is important, and it's not something we should scrimp on. You know, we shouldn't just say, well, we don't want to waste money on design. Because actually, if you invest a bit of money in good design, you can have a much better building at the end of it that people are much happier with and happier living in the long run. And I think the other point connected with that is around this idea of building at high densities near transport interchanges, because I think there's this idea kind of going around that, you know, well, there's a correct idea, which is that if you're going to build new housing, it's better to build it within 800 meters or so of a transport interchange, because you want people to be able to, you don't want to necessarily have to rely on cars all the time and so on. You know, there's lots of reasons why that's a good thing. But the logical extension of that, for me, should not mean that you therefore have to build the highest possible height to the highest possible density right by the station. You know, people sort of, I think, seem to think, well, because being near a station is good, therefore you must get higher and higher as you get towards the station. Whereas actually, I think most people would happily live 5 minutes walk from a station if you got a better home with a bit more space, you know, or even 10 minutes walk from a station if you got a slightly better home, rather than being crammed into an ultra kind of dense high tower right above a station. You know, the advantage of being able to, I guess the theory is you can jump into your lift and you know, go pretty much straight onto the train. I mean, okay, great, but I think people in general would rather have a nicer quality of life. And actually, a 5-minute walk in the morning, I think most people can live with. So I think this idea that you have to build high rise and you have to build the highest rise near a station is wrong. And I don't think that's necessarily how we should approach things. And it's not how you build affordable housing. I mean, the Manor Road Tower is 100% intermediate affordable. So that means it's shared ownership and other intermediate. There isn't any social rented housing, which there's an overwhelming need for. And arguably it's quite hard to build social rented housing for families in tall towers with high service charges and so on and so on. So it's not a great kind of typology for building affordable housing. And I think your second question, Anne, was about how do civic societies and so on have an impact on the planning process. And for me, I guess, I think there's sort of three things I would say. I think firstly, there's obviously the objecting to an individual application, which you know about. I think what I would say on that is it's always, I'm sure everyone in this group knows this, but I'll just say it for completeness sake. It's always important to make sure objections are focused very much on real planning reasons, as in like things that have a line in the policy, the planning policy, where you're hooking it on. Because, and this goes back to my time as a councillor, I remember having residents and local amenity groups speaking against a development very eloquently and passionately, but it was just not a planning reason. And even if you wanted to reject it on that basis, you couldn't, because it's a kind of quasi-judicial process. So the typical one is construction, the actual construction of the building. And people say, well, this is going to create problems during the construction, and it might, but that's not a planning reason. So I just think it's really important to focus. You've only got 3 minutes or whatever at the committee, to focus in on things which are very identifiably planning reasons. That's the first thing. The second thing is obviously about engaging with the overall planning process. So the development of the local plan, pushing for this design review panel. That's my little pet project, but anything you can say to support design review panels, I think is a good thing. Supporting there being better planning policy generally in the borough. And then thirdly, something which won't be relevant everywhere, but it might be in certain places. Try and be proactive through amenity groups about master plans for areas, because I mean, one thing that I think, I'll just use West Ealing. I don't mean to sound parochial, but I use it as a good example. One weakness of, I think, the approach to West Ealing is that there isn't a kind of consensus view about if you're going to build on the various different sites that might be around the station, how would they all look together? So you've got the Manor Road Tower, then you've got the Hastings Road people across the street, and they're obviously watching what's going to happen to Manor Road, but their design is totally different, and it's not necessarily coordinated and so on. There might be other little sites nearby. How should they get developed? And I sort of think doing a master plan and as early as possible in the process is really, really positive, because then you can say, rather than you get one big tower, which then means you can't build something next to it, or something, or it sets the precedent that's too high in terms of the height. You can have a vision for the whole area that not everyone will love, but at least you've had all of that discussion up front about the whole neighbourhood, rather than individual fights over many years.
Okay, thank you. We had a question specifically about design review panels, and you've partly answered that, but I think, and obviously there's suggestions about design review panels in the planning white paper, but how do you think the best way for communities to ensure that they get involved in these panels would be?
Yes, so my understanding is the design review panel is being launched sort of imminently, over the next couple of months. So definitely, get in touch via your local councillors, or you can feel free to drop me a line and I can pass it on if I'm your MP, or Rupa, or if she's your MP, and so on. So do get in touch through MPs or councillors. And obviously the council should put it on their website in due course, so check that. I think the council are also doing some sort of consultation events ahead of the formal process of the new local plan, and so getting involved in that early on is a good thing. And I guess just promoting design review as a positive part of the planning process. People in this group are going to have lots of connections to people involved in design and architecture in Ealing. I think making sure that we're all advocating for it is really important. I will just add on to the end of that. I won't go into this because it will be a long separate topic. But the white paper that you mentioned is really quite concerning in this regard, because what the white paper essentially does, the kind of 30-second version of it, is that at the moment you have your planning policy and then you have the individual planning applications. And so you kind of get two bites of the cherry. You can talk a bit about, you can influence the planning policy and you can object the application. In theory, what the government has talked about is taking away the second bit entirely and loading it all into the planning policy. So you develop a planning policy and then approving the application should be a tick box exercise. Does it, tick yes, no, that kind of thing. The difficulty with that is obviously it takes out the sort of democratic element of individual applications, but also it means that the upstream, the planning policy has to be incredibly complicated. And so in New York, they have a design code and it's like 4,200 pages long because it has to deal with every possible eventuality. You have to sort of preemptively imagine what people might come forward with. So I mean, it's early days in that policy. It's still a white paper. I suspect a lot of the government backbenchers are going to be pretty jumpy when they realise it means abolishing planning committees in all likelihood. So we'll see how far it gets. But just to sort of make a little note that that's a potential battle down the line.
Thank you. Well, I think you might have been reading some of our response to the white paper consultation based on that. And as you say, let's see what happens. And before I let you off the hook, we've got a couple of questions which are of a slightly different nature to take you away from planning.
Okay.
I'll ask you both of them and you can just answer them in whichever order.
Yeah.
How did you feel before giving your maiden speech? And the second is, what do you find the most tricky as a new MP following in the steps of Steve Pound?
Oh, wow. Those are good questions. So I'll start. Yeah, so I'll start with Steve because he's been such an amazing help and support over the last year, and particularly during the election campaign when you're going around trying to meet people as quickly as possible, particularly because it's quite a short election. It was all called and happened all very quickly, and it was cold and grim, and it was quite hard to kind of keep your energy up at some point. And if there's one person who can keep your energy up, it's Steve. So him. I'm still immensely grateful to him for coming with me every morning during the last few weeks of the campaign to school gates at kind of 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning to hand out election reminder leaflets to people, just after they dropped off their kids, give them a leaflet. And Steve, you can imagine he had the energy there, which is infectious every morning when he came out with me. So it's been really pleasurable to work with Steve. He knows everyone. He'll offer you advice. he's really, really great support. And I think in a way it's quite funny because the phrase I probably hear more than any other when people who knew Steve and they're meeting me for the first time, the phrase, "Oh, you've got big shoes to fill there, big boots to fill." That's the kind of phrase that people say. And when people say that in front of me and Steve together, Steve is, as you can imagine, he makes a joke of it, and he's like, "Oh, James is just like me, just got more hair," So it's he takes it in a very good spirit, and I think it's true. Steve was the MP for 22 years, and had built up an awesome reputation locally, and I think for me the two things which I draw from that is, firstly, I want to learn everything I can from him, and given he's so willing to share it, I'm very lucky to have him as the previous MP. I think sometimes that relationship is not so open if I talk to my colleagues, so I'm really lucky in that regard. I think the other bit though is to make sure I'm my own person, and actually even Steve says that to me very, very straightforwardly as well. It's like, you're different, you do things differently, you have a different focus and different style, and it's a bit of a challenge, I guess, to kind of learn from someone, but also make sure you're not trying to copy them and sort of replicate the way they did it, because it'll never work if you do it that way, and you're missing out on what unique you can bring to the role. And then finally, my maiden speech. So I would love to say that after 10 years, 15 years of being a councillor and deputy mayor, it was a breeze. I was absolutely terrified. I mean, it was just the most intimidating thing I've ever done, because it doesn't matter how many people I've spoken in front of. You walk in there, and that chamber that you've seen on TV, every other day on the news, those green benches, and suddenly you're standing in them. It's absolutely terrifying. Yeah, I can't think of any other way of describing it other than that. It's quite enjoyable once you get into it. You know, as is quite often the case with speeches, the first minute or two are hellish, and then and then you kind of get into your flow of it, and it's fine. I was glad when it was over, because people sort of said to you, "Oh, if you made a speech, oh well, you only get one of them." I'm like, "Yes, thank you, I'm aware of that." So the pressure was quite intense, but what I was pleased about is I felt I got to do in that maiden speech everything I wanted to do. I got to thank Steve. I got to talk about why it's an honour for me to represent Ealing North, talk about growing up here, talk about my priorities, and sort of set out a bit of what I want to do as an MP. So yeah, terrifying, but great.
Lovely. James, thank you very much. Let's leave it on that positive note. We would clap you in reality, but it doesn't really work on Zoom in my experience. But thank you very, very much for that. What I'd like to do now is we've had a request to go back and show the pictures of the 2 winning schemes again. And that may bring up some more questions, but also I hope that Matt is now back with us and stable. So hopefully, Matt, when we have the pictures of your scheme up, perhaps you can get the opportunity to say a few words. So first of all, can I go to Maggie and ask Maggie, can you show us the pictures of, I think 1A Mortimer Road came up first on the presentation. Oh, do you want to stop? Oh, okay. Okay, so if perhaps these would just go through the half dozen or so pictures, and if Maggie, you could just remind people what they were views of, and then if anybody has a question on those, could you put it in the chat?
I'm sorry, it's yeah, so you can see the copper cladding there. This is the Mortimer Road plan, and it's almost like looking through an archway from the window there. Yeah, I'm just having a, yeah, so this was the plan of the original house with the old extension there, and this is the new plan with the copper cladding this area and the kitchen area. This is the cross section of the kitchen and the famous ring lights looking out into the garden. And this is a more bird's eye view down of the landscape garden, the ponds, the extension, and of course the work goes on inside the house as well. And here the famous paving coming out, flowing out of the kitchen dining area into the garden. This is the horrific bit, isn't it? The construction stage, when the demolition has just happened and the build is taking place. That's the kitchen with the brass island there in the middle, and the famous ring lights and the echoing pattern in the garden. And that's the final slide from this scheme, showing the extension from the garden perspective.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. That hopefully fixes it in your minds. I've had a first question. Were there difficult, this I guess would be for the owners to answer. Were there difficulties getting planning permission?
I'm still here.
Are you still with us? Good.
Yes. Yes, I think I mean, Annie will know better than I, but yeah, there are a number of occasions backwards and forwards with planning officers and advisors, trying to get as much of what we wanted within the scope of what would be allowed. I don't know if you want to say anything, Anya. Is that?
Yeah.
The planning process was challenging as it's not a straightforward extension, and it obviously it's not in a conservation area, this project, and there was no changes to the front elevation of the property, so it was all happening in the rear, which was advantageous. But even so, due to the nature of the form of the extension, it did take some persuading, but we did get permission after. It was sort of a pre-application process, and there was a bit of toing and froing, and in the end we did get it. We were listening very, very carefully to what the planners said, and we gave our arguments across, and actually, as James Murray was saying, we used planning policy to our advantage, because as you can see, there are original copper finials on the building, and that's why we really did want to use that same copper, that the clients really loved those copper finials on the existing roof. And it was just the massing that was trying to convince the planners that the massing did work with the original building. And we've joined it with the original building with the same brickwork that the original building is made from. So there's a sort of a delicate or a more conscious fact that the brickwork is touching, and then the copper extension is set away from the original house. Yeah, but it took some time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. But Maggie, would you like to move on to the origami house?
Yeah. Whoops. So this is the origami house. Those are the plans. That's the original structure that the winning project replaced. That's the construction phase. A lovely view out. Kitchen and sitting room area. And the lovely kind of interiors and the lighting show up particularly well in that one. I think, yeah. And then that's the picture of the finished project. That's the last slide.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Now, hopefully, Matt, we're going to come back to you. So Matt, please unmute yourself and let us hope that we can hear you and let you finally have your say. I have one question as well, but have your say first.
All right. Yes, I mean, the house, it's quite a responsibility because the house is locally listed. It's one of the turreted houses that faces the church. So it's quite a special site, but the previous extension we did to the house was very popular in the neighborhood. As I was explaining earlier, it was wonderful in that the client just gave us a free hand and just said, well, what should we do with this building? And we just went off and we came up with this as the origami house concept, which was, as you explained in the introduction, inspired by the footprint of the unusual footprint of the original building. But we didn't want to put just a flat roof on like the original building had. We wanted something more dynamic. And then, but we had quite tight planning constraints, especially in terms of height. And so the natural way forward was to actually go for the CLT, which is cross-laminated timber. So it's a structural timber, and you can see it's flat pack, a bit like putting together an IKEA building, and it just shows the amazing precision of this material. It's all made in a factory and then brought into site and then craned into place. And they were literally 2 people maneuvering the panels into place, which are enormous. I mean, the panels themselves are quite heavy. But the amazing bit is that then we made a cardboard model in the office to present to the client, and it's that origami quality of when you fold paper or cardboard, it gives it enormous strength. So it's technically a folded plate structure is what it's called. And the origami, when it's put together, it does exactly the same as gives the exact same strength characteristics as if you were folding paper, and as origami art demonstrates. And then the client was very enthusiastic about the project, and we said, well, we want to make it a highly sustainable dwelling. And this is a stepping stone actually towards doing a full passive house, which we're working on a full passive house in Acton at the moment, on Acton Lane. Passive house is quite difficult to achieve on a building of this scale because it's relatively small. We do have mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which is one of the key elements in passive house. And then really it's super insulating it. So the kind of insulation thicknesses we've got here, it's about 15 centimeters or 6 inches of insulation, which if you think about a normal house will only have 2 inches or 50 millimeters of insulation in the walls. So we've got 3 times as much in the walls and the roof. And then it was our first experience of using CLT, but what we knew was that it would go up very quickly, and so therefore we knew exactly how big the windows and doors were going to be, and so we had those made ahead of time, and then they came in immediately after the CLT had been erected. And then it's really following through with the details. It has a wonderful, I mean, it has wonderful quality in itself. So we decided we didn't want to put plasterboard on the walls. We wanted to expose the beauty of the timber. And we did a lot of research. We went to see another CLT building in London that was just going up with the client. Yes, and the spaces are wonderful, and the client loves them. And working in there, it's a real family annex. So the idea is that originally it was that answering that question: what do you do with your grown-up children in London when they can't really afford to go off and buy a house? So this was originally intended to be a family annex for their grown-up daughter, but then they've also used it for their home office during the lockdown, which they say has been absolutely wonderful. And then eventually they think they may well move into the client will move into the annex, and the main house may be occupied by their daughter and dreaming of families and babies and things.
Okay, that's lovely. That sort of leads on to what you've talked about. We have 2 questions, and then we'll wrap this up. One quick question. First, what is the material for the roof? And then the second question is, again, were there any issues in gaining planning permission?
The roof is clad in the same way as the facade you can see here, which is Western red cedar. And with planning, we had some issues. Yes, it was we had to. It's a hard sell, and we had at one point they were nervous about the height. We had to massage it a little bit. The form of the building, actually, we changed the form to respond to the neighbours, and actually the surprise was that the neighbour we had to respond to most was the church, and they were very nice. I went to the extent of I visited them one Sunday, and because they were concerned about the effect of light to their church hall, which is where they hold their services. And you see the church hall stretched out behind the building. I had imagined that it would be laid out in a traditional fashion along the length of the hall, but it isn't. They hold their services across the short width of the hall, and the windows that they were worried about are behind the origami house. So I went along one Sunday and I sat in a spot which I thought was probably, it would represent the most difficult spot with respect to light and outlook, and just made, so I could see for myself. And then we discussed it with the church. They had their own architect. And then they were very happy when we made changes in response to their concerns. There was it was treated as an annex to the main house. So the one key thing is that what is referred to as the kitchen is a kitchenette, and so it has it means that the annex can be used independent of the main house. But it doesn't have a full kitchen, and that's the idea. That's a planning rule that you have to all eat together in the main house, at least sometimes.
Okay, that's lovely. Thank you very much, and I'm glad that the technology has held up this time. I'm sorry about any earlier problems. I think, talking of time, keeping an eye on the time, it's time we drew this all to a close. So what I'd just like to, a few thanks. Not only I've already thanked those who submitted projects, congratulated the winners. Thank you, James, for your contribution. But I'd also like to say this would not have been possible as an event without the help of colleagues. I'd particularly like to thank Maggie Gold for giving the presentation. Maggie chairs our communications committee and coordinates the awards scheme every year. Tony Williams, who produced the certificates, which we will send to you in PDF form so that you can have your own certificate. And also my husband, Patrick, for his technical support to this virtual event. I've put in a word for any residents who have not yet objected, and this is a steer here, to the proposed Percival House development. Percival House, the ex-home of the, current home of the council, such as remain in there. There's a major redevelopment project which yet again includes a tower, which causes severe harm, in our opinion, substantial harm to the town centre conservation area and the nearby listed Old Town Hall. So there is still time if anybody wishes to put in an objection. And on final note, I could say we always welcome new members to the society. So if there are anyone here who is not a member who'd like to join us, please go to our website where you'll find an application form. So I think that's now, thank you from me, and everybody do enjoy the rest of the evening. Goodbye.